I need all of the business leaders completely wired and thinking about how AI will exist in their business and ensure that they're thinking that way. And we've done a lot of work. We've done significant education of our board, significant education of the top 3 levels of the company. We recently spent half a week at MIT on a deep and, working on an AI immersion. And we've taken our entire executive, so this is several hundred people, through a 1-day AI introduction learning, ending with generating use cases. And those use cases are in a backlog, and most of them, align to sets of patterns, and we're going to do them. And they're now thinking well, how does this apply to my business? And we have to keep educating and training them so that they are thinking of their client. They're thinking of how they help their client, how they help their sales team, how they run their business.
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Augmented AI, and I'm excited that you're tuning into the Shift AI podcast, a show that explores what it takes to thrive and adapt to the changing workplace in the digital age of remote work and AI. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Dave Gillespie as our guest. David is a longtime technology leader at CIBC, one of Canada's largest banks, where he has been spearheading their AI and innovation initiatives. With 18 years of experience and a background in data, technology, and infrastructure, David brings a wealth of knowledge about how AI is transforming the banking industry. If you're someone interested in practical applications of AI in finance, the challenges of implementing new technologies in a regulated industry, or the future of work in banking, you're not going to want to miss this episode. We also want to send out a special thank you to Augmented AI for sponsoring this episode. This is going to be a great show, and we're super excited to talk to David today. We can't wait to learn more. Let's get to it. Dave, welcome to the Shift AI podcast. It's great to have you. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Hey, Boaz. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and share CIBC's AI story.
Well, I always like to start. I want to read back your work experience for the audience so that they can kind of get a better sense of you. You spent the early career, you were at EDS, which was acquired by HP. You spent some years at HP. And then you spent the majority of your career at CIBC Bank, helping with data, with technology, with infrastructure. And I'm really, really excited to dig into all the ways that you're thinking about AI now. But is that the right career trajectory? Did I get that right?
It is. I had a bit of a gap between EDS and HP, both at an internet startup where we had a very, very strong cryptographic play, and then spent 3 years in Sydney, Australia, working in a wealth management technology company.
Nice. Well, that's great. I always like to ask this question just to get a sense of folks' background. You're Canadian and you grew up in Canada. What was your family business situation like? Were your parents both in the business space? Did you guys talk about business at the dinner table?
Well, I grew up on a small farm in rural Canada. My parents were not farmers. My father is a mechanical engineer who worked for Atomic Energy of Canada, designing and licensing components for Canada's reactors, and ended up, leading a program to build a new reactor in Canada. And my mother is a mathematician who worked for Atomic Energy of Canada, working with the team who was doing all of the research on how to safely store nuclear waste.
Wow, that sounds interesting.
So the conversations weren't about business. The conversations were very technical. So talking about film boiling on a calandria tube, or the social issues of trying to predict what happens in 250,000 years when humans dig up nuclear waste. So it was a very technical conversation.
Yeah. So you've always been around that kind of those technical conversations your entire life. What was the first job that you did early where you actually got a paycheck, where you actually got paid?
Well, my first job where I actually got paid was teaching intro computer science to young children. So using a language where they would actually end up drawing things and doing simple commands to draw things. So that was a summer job. The most formative summer job I had was working for Reuters in Canada, programming APL. So an advanced analytics language from the 60s and 70s for, manipulating large data sets. So that was sort of my first real formative job that really told me I wanted to head in the tech direction. But the first paying job was teaching young children how to code.
Interesting. And so talk a little bit about, I mean, you've been at CIBC now for 18 years, a long time, and a lot has happened technologically during that time and a lot of changes. Can you just talk about the early years when you first got in and kind of what led you to what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I joined the bank right before the financial crisis. So obviously, post-crisis, significant work has happened in the data and analytics space to protect from those sorts of events, and that's been mandated across many banks globally in terms of risk management, but also in terms of pure capability. So when I joined, I was shortly after I joined, we were really launching our next generation online banking capabilities. We, and CIBC had a history of firsts. So we would pride ourselves in being an innovation bank within Canada always. So, we were the first Canadian bank to launch end-to-end e-deposits. And the American banks were ahead, but we were the first Canadian banks to do that. We were the first bank to launch an Apple Watch application, and we actually had Move Money built in. And Microsoft had said we couldn't do Move Money, and we showed them our design. And the next day, we were in the lab in Cupertino. We were the first to launch, automated telephone banking services, the first to launch automated teller machines in Canada. So we're very used to, being on the front end of innovation, but quietly so. It's rare that we talk about ourselves, and we're starting to pivot and start to talk more about ourselves as analysts are looking for more and more of what's going on. So you will have seen more press around AI, whereas these other things are probably new to you. We would just quietly do them because it's the right thing for our customers and our shareholders.
Very Canadian, very Canadian. Yeah. So I know that there was some big press recently, and I think it's a good segue into talking about Gen AI and what you guys are doing. Can you talk a little bit about the press release?
Yeah, so we've been talking about a few things, with Gen AI. So partly we're growing our team. So very specifically looking to grow our team, and we're looking for both, data skills. We're looking for infrastructure skills to work with data. We're looking for Gen AI skills, and the Gen AI skills we would have as both enablement engineers, so people can work with businesses and take business ideas and create, help create a technical response to that, and then data scientists. And for our at scale Gen AI use cases, we're using data scientists. They know how to assess a model, they know how to choose the right model, and then we find they are faster at developing prompts and than non-data scientists. So we have gone that route for our at scale use cases. We offer platforms to people if they want to do local work, which is accepted.
How is Gen AI showing up in the business, use case wise? How are you integrating it into what you're doing? I think the audience loves to hear about use cases where big entities are actually applying this technology.
So I'll talk about it in two streams. So one, in flight today, we have 4 large funded, what we call at scale use cases. So we're launching GitHub Copilot, and we'll have a press release coming out probably before this airs. And we're doing that across our entire development organization. And, so we see efficiencies for developers now. If you look at, it makes a development task this much more efficient, but developers don't spend their entire lives developing, and they have to do reviews. So we have controls built in around how they use it, but we absolutely see efficiencies, with GitHub Copilot. We have launched CIBC AI. So it's a Gen AI interface for our employees, really targeting knowledge workers, project managers, analysts, those types of people. And we've launched it with recipe cards. So, we have a recipe card for document review. So you could put a few documents in, create a summarization, do a summarization. We have post-meeting support, and then other recipe cards. So we're going to create a birthright knowledge worker capability and efficiency play. So we have launched that, and the platform it's launched on can handle many other things. So that is now in production and running. We are doing document ingestion. So, I as one of my other jobs, I run the global back office for the bank, and I've been trying to extract metadata from documents since 2016, and never getting the accuracy needed. last year we saw the accuracy on complex documents that we launched an at-scale business case. So we built out the technology infrastructure and framework that's now in place. We now have one document running at scale, and appreciate we're globally we're in the sort of top 40 size banks. The ops team extracts metadata from 18 million documents a year. This is worth getting at. So we now have some of our most complex documents at 70% accuracy, and by the time we launch next year, we'll be in the 85% with a human in the loop. We're very happy. And we see as models continue to improve, that aperture closes. So those are some of the big things that we're driving. So a CIBC AI, document ingestion, the GitHub Copilot. And then the fourth is a really at-scale RAG model. So we're on our CIBC AI, we're going to launch a small-scale RAG model for individual business units, but at scale for our entire retail bank knowledge workers, we're launching a RAG model that has access to their 55,000 pages of documentation. So it has a traditional cognitive search that then gets to a very comfortable human output for them. And it is actually improving their accuracy because they understand it much better than the sort of coarse process document that spits out. So people love it. And we see other at-scale Knowledge Central type use cases coming. I'm really happy with how that one's working.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about document ingestion because we're seeing a lot of that too. We're finding that that's a big problem for lawyers. It's a big problem for banks. It's a big problem for fintech. What are you seeing that's very specific to banking that are some of the challenges and some of the ways that AI is specific to that vertical?
So one, the number of unstructured documents that come in for review, particularly in a client onboarding, particularly in a credit authorization perspective, where a lot of bespoke custom written documents. So that's one use case, predominantly in the retail space. And then in the commercial and corporate spaces, the actual contract that we agree to is completely bespoke and custom, and yet has the same data that I would propagate into a system. So how do we, how can we short circuit that process? So those are sort of the two ends of the spectrum from the corporate side right to the retail side. Lots and lots of unstructured documents that really have a set of structured data embedded in them somewhere.
Before we go further with the interview, I want to take a moment to tell you about one of our podcast sponsors, Augmented AI, and how they are transforming businesses with Gen AI solutions. Augmented AI specializes in helping organizations uncover and address internal workflow challenges that Gen AI can solve. Their comprehensive process starts by identifying and prioritizing business problems, and then assessing each based on value, effort, and risk. Once a problem is selected, the Augmented AI team tests and validates the solution to ensure that it works. Only after this thorough validation do they draft technical requirements, which serve as a blueprint for building and deploying the solutions. The real beauty of partnering with Augmented AI is that they don't just stop at strategy and feasibility studies. They actually stand up the solutions and manage them for you so you can focus on what you do best. If you're interested in experiencing this innovative approach to deploying Gen AI solutions, visit simplyaugmented.ai and click on the Learn More button. That's simplyaugmented.ai. Now back to the episode. Now, I know this is going kind of deep on the technical side, but how have you solved some of those ingestion issues with really kind of scattered and varied unstructured documents coming in and having to normalize all of that? There's been some techniques that you guys have figured out?
Yeah. So one, for some of the documents, we're actually using some of the large language models that we can train ourselves. So rather than just tune with multi-shot methods or things like that, we're actually taking things like Mistral, and Mistral is one of the ones we're using today, where we can actually train it on the document so that it's less randomized, that it's very specific what it's looking for, very specific what it outputs. Yeah. So we're definitely looking at Mistral, but we're also using OpenAI and getting more success than we would have thought a year ago. So we're also using OpenAI for some of these things. Doing multi-shot with huge documents is too expensive, but we are absolutely refining our capabilities there as well. Again, we have data scientists doing this work.
Yeah.
Right. These aren't prompt engineers, and these are people who would choose different technologies for different documents, and we built a platform to allow for that.
Yeah, and it sounds like too that, and I think we're finding this as well in the work that we do, is if that data is good, clean, if it's structured coming in, the large language models have a lot easier task to be able to handle that data than when they're all over the place.
If the data is structured coming in, if we're trying to do analytics on it or make decisions, we would typically write our own model, unless you wanted a human output, in which case we might see an output. So we're right now working on some multi-model solutions where you start with a raft of structured data coming in, and we've written our own model. And today we'd have, some of our highest paid people in the bank would be doing this function, taking this complex documents, bringing it together, and then creating a summary output. And then they would write a report about it. Well, we've now we've written the model ourselves to create the first output. And now we're using Gen AI to create the report. Yeah. So we're actually now looking at a, two-step multi-model solutions for some of those more complex things. And these are, this is a workforce that if somebody had told me 6 years ago I'd be using AI to help them, I'd say, well, that's probably a bit too far in the future, which the future's here, right? So now we're doing it. And again, we're, with these complex use cases, we're doing pretty well. Another one that we've really focused on is some very specific, sort of regulatory outputs. And, in Canada, in the trading business, if you take an order from a client, you have to draft a charting note. So we have thousands of people taking orders from clients, their customers, over the phone, and then they spend a half an hour having to draft a charting note from their notes. Well, now, we're now in pilot. They take a recording of the call, they feed a transcript through, and again, using a Mistral model that we have trained, we get a very specific output, and it says what's missing. You didn't comment on these components of the trade that you have to have told the client about. So it'll push back on what they need to have in their transcript, and generally the people don't miss these things. So then they're one and done, and then they eventually will automate loading it into a repository. Right now it's a cut and paste, but the act of drafting it was taking them 25 to 35 minutes.
And now, before we dive deeper, I want to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about one of our podcast partners. As a listener of this show, I know you're trying to stay on top of all things AI and tech, which is why you have to check out the amazing GeekWire podcast, produced by GeekWire and hosted by Todd Bishop. It's a treasure of insights featuring industry leaders and the latest tech trends that are shaping our world, and the perfect companion podcast to Shift AI. GeekWire podcast is where technology meets curiosity and covers the world of technology, startups, and geek culture. Expand your tech horizons and join the conversation. Tune into the GeekWire podcast today, a perfect complement to our own discussions here. Don't miss out. Follow the GeekWire podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify. Now back to the episode.
I'm glad that you brought your experts into the conversation, because I know you think a lot about human in the loop. And I also I'm thinking a lot about worker displacement and job displacement. And, there's always this talk about, well, yeah, but the mundane work is going to go away and everyone's going to be doing super creative work. And, new jobs are going to get created. So don't worry, because the old jobs are going away, but we're going to have new jobs. I want to talk more about the people in the business and how you see these things evolving in the future.
So I'd see AI deployment, particularly Gen AI, feeling very much like automation. So operations went through an automation curve. In 2010, everybody looked at the biggest banks and said, "Oh, look, they save this many people." I'm like, well, we're smaller than them, and bots cost the same. So we found automation to be incrementalization, because there wasn't a killer app in automation. We certainly see people who replace their core banking application maybe, get more efficient in one step. But generally, it was sets of series of steps. So right now, the Gen AI phase we're in is this phase of automation. We're not doing a total system reset. We're not rethinking how the bank works. We're taking the current bank processes and automating and incrementalizing. And out of that, we're driving economic advantage. And whether you harvest that because your sales team has more time to do sales, or if you harvest it by, taking it that eventually, the roles are displaced, with the with the AI, those are the two outcomes. I'd say it's going to happen slowly, just like, in the automation we've done, we didn't let any employees go. It happened slow enough that we could plan for it. We could deal with it in retirements. We could deal with it in turnover.
Yeah.
So right now we're in that phase of AI. I think what interests us in AI is seeing as the aperture closes and you get the ability to get to a lower and lower error rate. You still need a human in the loop with judgment, but do you start resetting entire program, like entire processes? Do you redesign? So is this like with electricity? Because if you think of electricity, it's a use case that we got from the U of T. When electricity came in the 1800s, the first 30 years were incrementalization of the current factory floors. But then people did a total system reset and saved tons of money on their factories. So if you look at automation, you look at the redesign of cores, you look at APIs, you look at cloud infrastructure, and you overlay AI, we now have the ingredients for a system reset. And I think we're going to start seeing some of that coming, but it's not just AI, but AI will be embedded in a system reset. And I think you see a different economics, a totally different economic model mainly because the capability set will be totally different. So I think we see incrementalization coming, but then as you start looking at all of those aspects together, you then start saying, okay, well, now I can rebuild what a bank is.
Yeah. I mean, it's really an evolution in a lot of ways. And I think I talk about this a lot too. Right now people are personifying AI and there's the scary AI, there's the AI that's going to take your job and so on. But really it's software. I mean, we're still doing software development. It's just very powerful and different in the way that we wrote software before. But I like your automation analogy because it's very much the same.
It is for today. And like I say, like in the future, I won't need the automation layer because the apps will no longer need it. Right. Yeah. I won't need, and then AI can be embedded into business processes. So these are that's sort of the thought process that we would have.
Tell me a little more about regulation, because banks like healthcare and other industries that are heavily regulated have to deal with a lot of governance and compliance. How do you think about that in regards to AI, banking, and what you guys are doing at CIBC?
So first, banks globally are very used to being regulated on model governance and model risk. And models typically that get governed are very high risk models that affect liquidity. So they can destabilize the institution, or they could destabilize the region that you operate, or destabilize the planet if you're big enough.
Yeah.
AI, like legislation is coming from all over, right? So the EU's just announced that individual countries in the EU are going to have legislation. Canada is bringing legislation online. The US has legislation, and states are bringing in legislation. Plus, our direct regulators are also bringing in new rule sets. And the nature of all of these is a very broad definition of AI, which we would agree with. And it's going to look for things differently than model risk. They're not simply looking for liquidity destabilization. They're looking for, how have you used your client's data? Would your client agree with how you're using their data? Do you have bias in your models, right? And are you harming people by using the AI? And how do you know that you're not? And then how are you monitoring your models? So all of these things, similar to model risk, come in with the AI. It's just we're now doing them on things that previously we wouldn't have built this overlay. So, so the one is, yes, there's lots of regulation. I would say it's there to protect our clients and to protect our core infrastructure. I haven't read anybody's that's that wildly different. I haven't read anything that I would say those aren't things that we should be doing. So now the question is, how do you do it at scale? So at CIBC, part of my AI hub functionality is building out really two components to our governance. So one is a risk assessment of every AI use case coming through. I'm not going to say model because we're using the same models for all kinds of use cases, but every AI use case comes through. And we started doing that with Gen AI almost a year ago, that I've been overseeing every Gen AI use case with a team. But now we're formalizing that into a very structured deliverable with a very technical review. And included in that is legal, privacy, second line risk. So all of these risk groups and control groups will sit at this table, and all of the people who need to be there from a regulatory perspective are there. So we'll have partners from the US there because they need to have a seat at the table. So we'll have these different groups who will be there because lots of the models we do are global in nature. And the second thing we're doing is building out, we've launched an AI framework. So we haven't created a risk type for AI at CIBC. We've declared a framework because it affects many risks across many horizontal and vertical axes.
Sure.
So we have a framework, and we're going to create an overall governance committee where all the at-scale AI practitioners come to bear and talk about deploying governance. So first off, we need inventories of all our AI models. We need risk assessment to ensure we have risk assessments in place for them. We need to track KRIs against those models. We need to know that everybody's monitoring the models, monitoring for drift, et cetera. So all of the classical things we do exist. And this governance is for both Gen AI and as well as AI models we create ourselves. So we're going to build that governance capability. What we are saying is that you need to be at scale to do it. So if you have one data scientist, you still have to follow all of this. So we're suggesting that, that we create larger teams to make sure that they can both do the AI work, but also govern it.
In some ways, it's nice that you guys have been regulated for so long. So you have frameworks in place for so much of this, and now you're just going to apply that rigor to AI.
But that's exactly right. And we have all kinds of other risk streams that we would feed if the AI, triggers certain types of risks. So if we were doing an AI model that was going to hit something in liquidity, they'd be directed to make sure they follow that path, and all of those types of things. Like, we can follow existing pathways as much as we can.
Yeah, it's great because a lot of businesses are new to this. A lot of the listeners, some of them are owners of businesses. They're trying to figure out what the framework should be, so this is super helpful. When you think about the future, and you've been doing this a long time, you've been a developer for a very long time, like, how excited are you about this new technology? What do you think about the future of CIBC? If you can kind of look at your crystal ball, and just the future of work and AI as it's going to develop over the next decade.
So if I started with the client experience, we're going to make faster decisions. We're going to be far more accurate. We're going to be completely transparent about what their data is used for. I think I see all kinds of advantage to client experience. And I think if we could move faster on that, like it can be a differentiator. Our competition are all good at this, right? So, we have a healthy respect for each other, and we believe others are moving at pace as well. But we certainly see these advantages. We see advantages to the employees. Like we think the work, in a bank becomes more and more interesting. So less and less, just doing work, and more thinking, and more really putting the client at the center of how we operate as an employee, and how we think, and how we will drive decisions. And the AI will even better put the employee at the center of our conversations. And then finally, the shareholder will win, right? One, if we create, competitive advantage, they win on the one side. If we create more capacity for our sales organization, that may or may not give an upside. I mean, there becomes a finite capacity within a region for its ability to consume a certain type of asset. So or service. So I think there's there's not endless growth opportunity. There is, but we certainly can get at that. And then there's an efficiency side to it, which can get there. And in Canada, we're the fifth largest bank. We care deeply about efficiency. We have less resources. We're very conscious to make sure that when we deploy them, we get multiple uses out of the deployment of resources. And we think AI is absolutely a key piece.
Yeah. Super interesting. And I love that, this idea that there's much more strategic thinking that can happen in an organization when you start deploying this kind of technology.
Yeah.
Well, I always ask the same question at the end of this show, and I'll ask you the same thing. And if you were to use 2 words to describe the future of work, the future of AI, future of banking, what would those 2 words be? And then you can elaborate.
I'd say evolving quickly.
Okay.
A year ago at Doc Ingestion, we started with the most complicated document because we thought, why waste time figuring out if it's going to work or not? And we had 50% accuracy. A year later, we're at 70%, which is good enough for our process, not quite where we want it. This is the most complicated document. This is with lines crossed out, handwritten notes, circles with initials. We're at 70%. So this time next year, we'll be doing things like that rapidly, getting those things just coming off the rack. And it'll be normal course. So what today is new and exciting will be normal course. But to truly evolve quickly, we need, AI is not the strategy. The business runs the strategy. So I need all of the business leaders completely wired and thinking about how AI will exist in their business and ensure that they're thinking that way. And we've done a lot of work. We've done significant education of our board, significant education of the top 3 levels of the company. We recently spent half a week at MIT on a deep working on an AI immersion. And we've taken our entire executive, so this is several hundred people, through a 1-day AI introduction learning, ending with generating use cases. And those use cases are in a backlog, and most of them, align to sets of patterns, and we're going to do them. So, and they're now thinking well, how does this apply to my business? And we have to keep educating and training them so that they are thinking of their client. They're thinking of how they help their client, how they help their sales team, how they run their business.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you have business leaders not scared or anxious about this technology that are leaning in. So you guys, I know you know this, but you guys are very far along. And even though things are moving and evolving quickly, it sounds like you're going to have the team that can stay ahead of the curve. So Dave, thank you so much for being on the show. It really, really is helpful to see use cases that are being put into action. So I really appreciate having you on.
Well, thanks, boys. And again, thanks so much for letting me tell the CIBC story. It's we're very thrilled with where we are, and we think the future is very bright.
Well, we'll definitely have you guys back again as this thing evolves, and I look forward to it.
All right.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Such a pleasure to have David Gillespie as our guest on today's episode. David brings a unique perspective on how AI is being implemented in one of Canada's largest banks, showing us the real-world applications of this technology in a highly regulated industry. His insights into document processing, employee augmentation, and the future of banking gives us a glimpse into how AI is not just changing processes, but potentially reshaping entire business models. If you want to stay connected with David, you can find him on LinkedIn. If you're interested in his insights on integrating AI into banking and finance, definitely connect with him and keep up with his posts and activities online. I continue to be amazed by the guests we've had on our show, and I'm excited about the ones joining us in the near future. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us today. Thank you for listening to this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the Shift AI podcast for more exciting interviews, and to the Augmented AI Weekly newsletter for updates on how AI can help you scale your business. The Shift AI podcast is syndicated by GeekWire, and we are grateful to have the show sponsored by Augmented AI. Our theme music was created by Dave Angel.